This week, Future of Jewish founder Joshua Hoffman joined David Harris on his TV program, Defending Israel, that broadcasts on JBS. Enjoy their conversation.
Hello, JBS viewers. I'm David Harris, and this is Defending Israel. Since October the 7th, I've tried to bring you some really interesting voices you may not have heard before October the 7th. One of them is Joshua Hoffman. Ever since I encountered his Future of Jewish on Substack, I've become a regular reader and encouraged others to do the same. And now I'm very pleased to introduce you, JBS viewers, to Joshua Hoffman. Joshua, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Joshua, for those of the viewers who don't know who you are, your background, tell us a little bit about where you come from, and also importantly, why you chose to make Aliyah to Israel some years ago.
Sure. Well, I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California, in the San Fernando Valley. Went to public school there, went to my undergraduate at San Diego State University, studied journalism, wanted to be a sports journalist, and actually was for about 5 years a sports journalist. And then when I was 23, just before my 24th birthday, I took a trip to Israel that probably most of your viewers have heard of, called Taglit Birthright Israel. That was my first time in Israel. Mm-hmm. And, frankly, my dad is a diehard Zionist, and so is my mom, but we never really spoke about Israel in our home. And this was before social media, so I didn't have the opportunity to maybe see things on YouTube or Instagram that folks have today. And so when I went on Birthright, it was really my first experience with Israel and Zionism, and it was enlivening, to say the least, and it literally changed my life. And I decided after this 10-day trip in January 2013 to actually not get on the plane back to Israel and back to the States and to stay in Israel. And I ended up finding an apartment in Tel Aviv, became an Israeli citizen officially about 5 months after that, May 2013, and been living in Tel Aviv ever since. And from there, it became clear to me, especially after Tzuk Eitan, which is the Hebrew name for the operation against, basically the last war against Hamas in 2014. With the communications and journalism background, it became very clear to me that Israel had an international PR problem. And so I started to sort of look in that space in the 2000 teens up until 2020.
Joshua, let me stop you for a moment, okay? Because there's one piece that I want viewers to understand better. So you took the Birthright trip. You obviously became a poster child for Birthright in a sense. But
in a way,
what was it about Israel that so captivated you that it led you not just to return for other visits, but to actually choose to settle in Israel and live there for the last 11 years? What happened?
It's a good question. I've tried to psychoanalyze myself looking back. In the moment, I can tell you that it was kind of just a gut feeling. It felt right. It made sense. I had an online marketing business at the time, so I could just continue it from Israel. I was basically a digital nomad at that point. I think looking back, growing up in Los Angeles and growing up Jewish, sort of Reform/conservative Jewish, I always felt like a minority in the States. And I didn't like, for example, Christmas. Christmas Day was always I just remember as a kid having a weird feeling, like not really fitting in, and everything was closed. So when I got to Israel, I think being instantly part of the majority, I think also American Jews have a safe or a special spot for Israelis in a way. And I find the culture to be fascinating and very much, I always tell Israelis that I had chutzpah before I moved to Israel, and in the States it was rude, and in Israel it's socially acceptable. So it was just sort of this cluster of different psychological and emotional triggers that it just made it, like I said, it just felt right to stay in Israel after the Birthright trip and to make Aliyah and to make it my new home.
Okay, terrific. So now go back to the journey that ultimately leads you to the future of Jewish and where you are today.
Yeah. So, I have a journalism background, but I've been doing marketing for about 11 years. And I think both of those skills are very much relevant to the lack of effective Israeli international PR. And I actually reached out to a lot of organizations. I reached out to, actually, I'm not going to name any names, but I reached out to a lot of organizations that I'm sure you know and your viewers know. And no one would return an email. And no one was interested, frankly, in listening to somebody who kind of came from the outside and wanted to make an impact on the way that Israel is seen and perceived by people around the world. And so I actually just decided to start my own thing. And in 2020, just a month before COVID really took shape, I started an Israeli streaming company called Izzy, I-Z-Z-Y, which is what they call the Israeli version of Netflix, Israeli movies, TV shows, documentaries, totally outward facing, meaning it's available worldwide except not available in Israel, because our goal was to enhance the world's relationship with Israel. And so we launched this streaming platform. It immediately caught, as they say in the startup world, product market fit. We jumped out to like 10,000 paying subscribers almost within like 3 months. I teamed up with an Israeli TV executive, a longtime Israeli TV executive, who actually is still running the platform to this day. His name is Nati Dinar. He's a close friend and a mentor and a former business partner. I have moved on from that. I now run Future of Jewish, as you mentioned.
But before we get to Future of Jewish, for those viewers who want to find Izzy and begin to follow it, how do they do it?
Yeah, so it's available wherever you get other streaming platforms, on Apple, Google, Amazon, however you get your streamers like Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever else you subscribe to. And of course, you can visit the website, which is streamisrael.tv,
Okay.
www.streamisrael.tv.
Okay, now let's come to Future of Jewish. Talk to us about how it started, and then I want to zoom in on some of the columns that you've written that certainly caught my eye.
Sure. Well, you'll appreciate this. I received a book, an advanced copy of a new book called Why Do Jewish, which was written by Zach Bodner, who I assume you know or have heard of. He runs the JCC in Palo Alto, California. Mm-hmm. And he wrote this new book called Why Do Jewish? And he sent me an advanced copy. And I never read books. I listen to books, but I never read them. But he sent me an advanced copy, and it was sitting on my desk in my apartment in Tel Aviv. And it was kind of just staring at me for a few days, pick me up, pick me up. And the Jewish guilt kicked in. I picked it up, finished it within 24 hours. I mean, it was a great book. It really opened my eyes to what I guess is now what people call the organized Jewish world. I didn't really know that apparatus existed. I delved into it a little bit via Izzy, but Zach's book was really an eye-opener for me. And the entrepreneur in me, entrepreneurs are problem solvers. And Zach talked about a lot of good things that were happening in the Jewish world, but he also highlighted some negative trends that were actually only getting worse. Anti-Semitism, Jewish assimilation in different countries. And so I decided I want to help solve some of these issues to the extent that they're solvable, but I also needed to learn more. And so I took on this unofficial research project on my own volition as I was running Izzy with my business partner, Nati. And basically, that was the first iteration of Future of Jewish. I started essentially live blogging as I was researching the organized Jewish world, which was a combination of having conversations with people like yourself, organizational leaders, rabbis, community leaders, influencers from all over the world, US, Canada, Australia, South America, South Africa, Australia. And as I was having these conversations with people, and as I was reading a lot of the research that exists on the internet about the organized Jewish world, I was just writing in real time about what I was learning. And so that was the first iteration of Future of Jewish.
And today, give us some numbers to give us a sense of the reach of Future of Jewish.
Today we have 70,000 subscribers in more than 50 countries. Of course, a lot of Jewish subscribers, a lot of US Jewish subscribers, but not only. one of the things I learned from my days at Izzy is that a lot of people just assume that subscribers are going to be Jewish or Christian evangelical, for example. But a lot of people are interested in the Jewish world, and a lot of people are interested in Israel and Zionism. And so we have really a wide variety of types of subscribers. I have gotten to know some of them personally. Some of them actually invested in Izzy. And today what Future of Jewish is actually kind of, I wouldn't call it live reporting, but live commentary, day-to-day commentary about what's going on in Israel and how it affects the greater Jewish world. And that happened by accident. I mean, I woke up on October 7th at 6:58 a.m. in my Tel Aviv apartment to, missile and rocket alarms going off in Tel Aviv and other parts of Israel. And after a few days of obviously what became known as October 7th, I had this huge email list, and people were saying, you should write about what's going on and what you're seeing and hearing from Israel. And so since October 7th, Future of Jewish has basically become live commentary, long form essays about Israel, Zionism. I try to really go into the context and the history and the nuance and the depth that most people are not going to get from mainstream media or from social media. So we do really focus on what they call long form content. We also have a complimentary podcast for people that prefer to listen instead of read. And we really try to hit on every angle. There's so many different angles, as I'm sure you know, and as I'm sure many of your viewers know. You obviously have the Israel-Palestinian issue. You have Israel and its history and Zionism as a movement. You have the whole Palestinian side. You have the greater Arab and Muslim side. You have the current geopolitical situation in the Middle East and North Africa. And then you have the greater Jewish world and how it's been affected, both directly and indirectly, because of October 7th. So we really try to hit on all those different angles and peel back so many different layers. I mean, Israel and Judaism together have so much history that it's vital to understand the history and the nuance and the context if we can truly understand and wrap our heads around what's happening today in Israel.
And I think it's fair to say, Joshua, as now a regular reader, you pull no punches. So let's go sort of plunge into this a bit. You wrote an essay, for example, on what you called fraudulent liberals. Explain.
I'm effectively talking about progressives. I used to consider myself a progressive, by the way, when I lived in California, when I was in, studying at San Diego State University. And I think actually some of the progressive values are quite legitimate and reasonable. But I think that, everyone likes to talk about sort of the right-wing extremists, but I think the fraudulent liberals are actually the left-wing extremists. And I think what I've noticed, both in Israel and in the United States, and I'm sure it exists in other places like Canada and Australia and Europe, is that people are so quick to point out extremists in an opposing party, but sort of turn a blind eye or don't want to talk about the extremists in their own party. And so the fraudulent liberals was basically saying these progressives have become so extreme that the Democratic Party in the United States and liberalism is not what they're trying to tell us, these fraudulent liberals, these progressives. Again, some of their agenda, some of their ideas are great, and I hold them dearly, but a lot of it is bordering on, extreme socialism and Marxism and communism, which frankly has already been proven in many places in the world that it just doesn't work. And so to me, to call yourself a liberal, but to go way beyond the bounds of what you and I might call classical liberalism, to me is fraudulent and dangerous.
But speak to us about fraudulent liberals and Zionism. What is the intersection or the confrontation between the two?
By the way, you have fraudulent liberals in Israel, Israelis, who are fraudulent liberals as well. I think that some people in Israel that are extreme left kind of say, okay, Zionism achieved what it was meant to achieve, a safe haven for Jews. Now we don't need a Jewish state anymore. And I think that would be the extension to fraudulent liberals, outside of Israel as well, where they're basically saying Zionism is an outdated, politically incorrect movement in 2024 and moving forward. We know, it's been called colonialism. We know it's been called ethnic cleansing, forced displacement. And all these things are just factually incorrect and intellectually dishonest. And I'm all about, as a journalist, I have a thirst for knowledge and information. And I don't think about, oh, well, is it left or is it right? Is it conservative? Is it liberal? For me, I love to learn from all types of people and sides and places in the world. But let's be intellectually honest and let's respect history, and not just pretend like it's all a bunch of BS and therefore none of it matters. And whatever I wake up feeling today is the only thing that goes. Like, to me, that just doesn't add up. And I think, again, it classifies itself as being fraudulent.
Another place where you pulled no punches, Joshua, was in what you refer to as self-hating Jews. In fact, I think you've done more than one essay. One was on the psychology of self-hating Jews, I think back in December maybe. And more recently, after the Academy Awards, you reacted to Jonathan Glazer, who by now gave that infamous comment upon receiving an Academy Award. So talk to us, and obviously JBS viewers will have a special interest in this subject matter. Talk to us about your view of the psychology of self-hating Jews.
Well, there's quite a bit there. I don't, if people can go to Future of Jewish and read the whole essay, there's multifaceted. I used to be a self-hating Jew, and there's a spectrum, right? It's not like, it's 0 or 100. There's a spectrum, and there's different psychological nuances that come into play when you're talking about self-lamenting or self-hating, lack of self-respect. Again, it's a spectrum. With the Jews, I think it goes back to what I said before about the fraudulent liberals, where people would be wise to go and read a few history books. And you can read many history books. You can read Palestinian history books. You can read Israeli. You can read left-wing Israeli, right-wing Israeli. You can read, there's a variety of voices out there, and there's a lot of literature that's been written about history. And I think most people that, including my former self, that don't have that full, bigger picture of the historical context in which we live today. I think that's where you start to realize, like, there's a much bigger narrative and a much bigger piece of the pie here that contextualizes a lot of what we're seeing and feeling and witnessing today. And I think that if people really want to have a firm understanding of their identity, Jewish identity, Israeli identity, Zionist identity, it's not so much about what's happening today. It's really just about going and reading or consuming different history. And it's not just about reading. Documentaries and movies and podcasts and audiobooks. I find that the more that people do that, the more they'll realize, first of all, there's sort of a humility that comes with that. They're realizing, we're just a little speck in this big experiment called human civilization. And then specifically with Jewish history, we're a little speck in this sort of 4,000-year history of Jewish, of the Jewish story and Jewish tradition and so on and so forth. And I find that the people that don't want to talk about history because it doesn't add up with what they're feeling or thinking today, I find those people not just to be self-hating if we're talking about Jews, but going back to the previous essay we talked about, to truly be fraudulent members of society, meaning people that cannot positively contribute to society, whether it's American society or Jewish society or Israeli society. And with those people, I have a big problem.
It's very clear. So let me zero in again. When you first heard Jonathan Glazer's comment, I don't know whether you happened to be watching the Academy Awards or you saw it later on, but what was your immediate reaction?
I wasn't surprised.
Why?
First of all, I knew that something was going to happen at the Oscars, and there were many things at the Oscars. Jonathan Glazer was one of a few things. I wasn't surprised because people like Jonathan Glazer grow up in silos. And that's fine. If you're 15 or 12 or 8 and you're growing up in a bubble, that's fine. But when you're sort of a middle-aged person, I think especially in 2024 where travel and accessibility to media and content and information is so available, to me it's like of course somebody from Hollywood, which lives in like a bubble within a bubble within a bubble, is going to come out. And it's like also it's so clear that he just wanted the adulation of like that room. And like how egotistical is that, right? Where like he was sort of pandering, if you will, to this like group of people that are frankly detached from reality, that have no idea what they're talking about, and frankly should just keep their mouth shut about things that they have zero knowledge about. I mean, if you want to educate yourself and then have a conversation, that's fine. But if you're just going to say things because it sounds good in a certain room, I mean, and I bet you he regrets it. I bet you he regrets it because, yeah, in that moment, maybe he got the applause, but I bet you he regrets it. I bet you people are telling him behind closed doors that was a mistake. The same way that people are telling Chuck Schumer, by the way, what he said last week on the floor of Congress, basically demanding that Israelis hold elections and trying to speak for us. I think people also told him that was pretty stupid.
Well, I can only hope that Jonathan Glazer actually does regret it. And if he does, he certainly has platforms, maybe even Future of Jewish, to express his regret. We don't have a whole lot of time left. And I most recently read a column that you wrote, which again is quite provocative. You called on President Joe Biden to retire. And you did so, as you yourself wrote, as a lifelong Democratic voter. So please explain. Why do you want him to retire, and what do you think would replace him?
So I think, his platform is being hijacked by these progressive, fraudulent liberals. I don't think Joe Biden himself is one of those, but I think that the populism, by the way, that the Democrats accuse the Republicans of, especially Trump, they're doing the same thing. They're pandering to a few 100,000 Arab and Muslim Americans because they don't want to lose their vote. And I find that when you pander to people that are anti-American and anti-democracy, which is not all of these Muslim and Arab Americans, but many of them, that's un-American.
How do you know that, Joshua? I'm sure there'll be people watching this who say, wait a second, how can you say that? They're anti-American and anti-democratic. What does that mean?
Well, for example, there's free speech and then there's hate speech and bullying and harassment and going around in a type of thuggery and trying to intimidate people and attacking Jews who have nothing to do with what's happening in Israel, even though America stands apparently, supposedly, for freedom of religion. So I have no problem with, if they're Muslim and they want to do their Muslim thing, that's great. But when they start sort of infiltrating Jewish spaces, Jewish businesses, Jewish people, and doing what they've been doing from a harassment and bullying and kind of incitement point of view, that's just un-American. America is all about live and let live, and don't try to impose your religion or your beliefs, on other people. And if you do it in a respectful and appropriate manner. And these people are not doing that, and they're perverting freedom of speech and they're perverting freedom of religion, and that by definition is un-American and anti-democratic. And so, it would be one thing if these Muslim and Arab Americans made up a significant amount of people, but they don't. And therefore, that's a populist approach that the Biden administration is taking. And I'm of the belief that once that precedent is set, if it hasn't already been set, that just is going to enable not just those groups of people, but others that are also un-American and anti-democratic. I'm all for reform, and, I'm a classical liberal. I'm all for change and reform, but within certain guardrails. And I think that what the Biden administration has showed us since October the 7th. People want to talk about Donald Trump cozying up to neo-Nazis. Well, the last time I checked, the numbers about anti-Semitism in America are through the roof under the Biden administration.
But Joshua, isn't it also fair to say and to add to the conversation that from October 7th, Joe Biden has been staunchly pro-Israel? The administration has backed
Israel? I don't think he has been. I don't think that's an accurate statement.
Okay, why? And again, time is short, so I'm going to have to force you into condensed comments.
Yeah. I mean, again, the Jews suffered the worst attack since the Holocaust on October 7th. And for about 10 days, the world cared and empathized and sympathized with Israel. And since then, the Biden administration has been unable to say the word anti-Semitism without Islamophobia in the same sentence, number one. Number two, they've gone out of their way to covet these Muslim and Arab Americans, particularly in Michigan. And their whole, it's like if you and I are in a relationship and one day you tell me I'm great and the next day you tell me I'm a piece of crap, like that's an unhealthy relationship. And I'm not suggesting that Biden can't question Israeli policy in the war and in other places, but that's not what he's been doing. He's been speaking untruths and spreading misinformation about Israel that has effectively incited many groups of people across the world, especially in America, including but not limited to these Arab and Muslim Americans. And that to me is not being a staunch supporter.
But Joshua, and again, last seconds, but you're calling for him to retire. You're a Democratic voter. What would replace him in today's topsy-turvy America? Are you confident?
Well, he himself said, he himself said about 2 months ago that there's 50 different Democrats that could beat Donald Trump. So I'm sure one of those 50 could, I don't know, who's on that list. That was his quote, not mine. Mm-hmm. But if that's the case,
and stand by Israel,
I have to believe could be true.
And stand by Israel.
But I don't think he is standing by Israel. I mean, he's effectively
I'm
not
talking about the other
Israel.
50. Okay. So, yes or no, if I can put you in that kind of corner for a moment. Are you bullish or bearish on Israel's future after October the 7th, looking beyond today? Hopeful?
Too early to tell.
Huh?
Too early to tell.
How about the American Jewish community? What does its future look like to you now living in Israel?
I'm bearish.
You're bearish.
Yeah.
In a sentence, why?
Getting too comfortable. Not realizing how good you have it and having to be vigilant every day to ensure that that situation of having it very good remains and not getting too comfortable and too cozy in a country that was not created for you, was never created for you, and will never be created for you. And you can be guests there, and that's fine, but people are getting a little bit too cozy and comfortable. And I think some people are waking up to that today.
So you think that American Jews should be defined as guests?
No, I don't think they should be defined as guests. They're American citizens, but as we've seen in Jewish history, effectively, any Jew in a country not named Israel is a guest in that country. We saw that in Spain, we saw that in Germany, other places in Europe. So they're not actual guests, but in effect, we are.
We've run out of time. Joshua, tell viewers once again, how do they find you and Future of Jewish?
www.futureofjewish.com.
Joshua, thank you very much for joining us from Israel today. JBS viewers, I hope you'll agree that this was, again, a very thoughtful and thought-provoking conversation, in this case with Joshua Hoffman, the founder of Future of Jewish. This is David Harris, defending Israel. Looking forward to seeing you again very soon.